The Texas Education Agency on Thursday denied Austin Independent School District's request for a pause in accountability ratings at 3 of its academically struggling middle schools. The decision means if any of those 3 campuses earn another F rating this summer, the district could be at risk of a state takeover. This week on Inside the Investigation, investigative reporter Kelly Wiley explains why the state denied the district's request and lays out what could happen next. Welcome to this week's Inside the Investigation. I'm Christopher Adams, joined by our investigative reporter Kelly Wiley. Good to see you, Kelly.
Good to see you.
And we're talking about something that we've done a lot of coverage on over the past couple of years, ISD and their turnaround plan for 3 struggling campuses. We're talking about Burnett, Dobie, and Webb middle schools, and a big update in the case that came through today.
Yes. So today we got a letter that went to Austin ISD sometime in the afternoon from the Texas Education Agency, and we should step back. Dobie, Burnett, and Webb, we know, have had 4 consecutive F ratings, and these ratings really are looking at standardized test scores, but also looking at growth that campuses have. So it's a big deal when they don't get, an acceptable rating. And what happens in the state of Texas if a campus gets 5 consecutive F ratings, unacceptable ratings, is it triggers this kind of stricter, more broad intervention from the state. We've seen it happen at Houston Independent School District. We've seen it happen at some other school districts in the state. But essentially, it would allow for the Texas Education Commissioner to appoint a board of managers for the entire school district. So think about that. One campus gets 5 consecutive Fs. It wouldn't matter if all 3 of them got 5 consecutive Fs or one. One campus gets 5 consecutive Fs, and it would allow the Texas Education Commissioner to appoint a board of managers and potentially appoint a new superintendent to run the school. And if you don't know what a board of managers is, the elected school board would still be the elected school board, but the board of managers that's appointed by the Texas Education Commissioner in a situation like this would essentially have the power of an elected school board. So that's what's at stake here. So you've got these 3 campuses that were already working on turnaround plans, intensive plans to help turn around the schools. But then halfway through the year, the school board took a look at the middle of the year test scores to get an idea of what's this going to look like at the end of the year in August when we get back our A through F ratings. Are we going to make a C? Are we even going to make a D? And what it showed was that ultimately there was some progress, something for those students and for the staff to really be proud of, that they made marked improvements. But there was a concern that they were going to get to the finish line and get a score that would prevent state intervention. So they initiated kind of the back half of the district's plan, which was to apply for what's called 1882 benefits. And those benefits, they can do, most importantly, 2 things. One, it can pause accountability ratings and interventions for a campus for 2 years. So that 5th F that was kind of looming, or that the district was hoping through these turnaround plans would not be the outcome for these 3 schools. It's not that it wouldn't matter, but it wouldn't lead to this district-wide takeover. They would have a pause on that while they improved. It would also mean that they would have increased funding, but part of it is that they have to select a third-party partner, some sort of group that could come in and basically operate the campus as a charter school.
So we're talking about these accountability ratings that you keep mentioning. These are something that the Texas Education Agency rates every school, every public school campus statewide every year. And like you mentioned, these 3 schools that we're talking about, Burnett, Dobie, and Webb, they've had 4 F ratings in a row. And again, if any one of those get a 5th F rating in a row, it could open up the district to state intervention here. Before we talk about why this plan was denied, let's talk about what the plan even was. So how did AISD decide who they were going to pick for this turnaround plan at these 3 schools?
So Like a lot of vendors that a school district or any state agency would bring in, they have to do an RFP. There's a process. They have to open it up and say, hey, this is what we're looking for. Please apply if you think that you can meet the requirements of this plan. And so that's what the district did. Even before the board had that assessment of the middle of the year scores, they knew this was the back half of their plan. So they were already trying to lay the groundwork and start looking around. And so they did that. But essentially, records show they had one applicant.
So they had no choice, really.
Yes, pretty much. And so and I should say that reporting originally came from the Austin Current that found that there was just one bidder, the Texas Council of International Studies. And that vendor, this nonprofit, has worked with other schools to do similar things to turn them around. So it was kind of a long process. There were several votes that the school board could have taken. There were several points where in the timeline that the district had put out in their school board meetings that they could have taken votes earlier, but ultimately they voted, and it was the Texas Council of International Studies that they went with, this bidder that applied to take over.
Talk about these turnaround plans. So they've essentially chosen this third-party vendor to come in and do this. What would a turnaround plan have looked like?
So they've already been under one state mandated turnaround plan, and that was like an in-district plan, right? So part of that was that they needed to establish some new curriculum. Part of that needed more intensive school days for the students there, and part of that was we need to reassess the actual staff. So they were doing assessments of who are our most high-performing educators, and if they were, through this evaluation system that Austin ISD created, not considered high-performing, they were brought to another campus, or maybe they resigned, and then they were bringing in and shuffling in these higher performing teachers so they could really take this year and be intensive and get the scores up. This would be different. So this would no longer be the district's staff necessarily. It would be this third-party nonprofit coming in and using their own curriculum. And we should say TCIS in particular is an international baccalaureate program. So what they typically do is develop IB curriculum, they train on IB, and they run IB programs. And you've probably heard of an IB program at your school, and they're very well regarded and thought of, and parents usually want to get their kids in those types of programs. So that's what TCIS does. And so essentially what it would look like is this partner, TCIS, would come in and they would now operate Burnett, Dobie, and Webb, and they would use their curriculum and the curriculum that they trust and their staff to run these schools. They could probably hire people who are currently AISD employees, but there's still more we're trying to learn about how that would work, but it would essentially be, here's this program and we're going by their rules. The district would still technically have ties to those schools, right? Because think of, there was another school that did this, that AISD did this with, Mendez Middle School, and they had under an 1882 benefits program where Third Future came in, that was their partner, came in and worked with the school for many, many years to try to get it to turn around. And actually, very recently, they ended that collaboration because Mendez improved, according to the school district. So that's how it would look. It would literally be run by an entirely different company operation, but still have ties to the district. And it should be said, this partner would still have to report to the board. So they would still have to come in and say, this is how we're doing, this is how grades are looking, and trustees would have the opportunity to question them about how things are going. So
this was sort of a last ditch effort here for the district to bring in this third-party vendor to avoid this state takeover. Why not just close those 3 schools? Would that make the problem go away?
It would not make the problem necessarily go away. And the school district has been honest about that closing the campus could have some impact on state intervention, but it wouldn't necessarily make the problem go away. And honestly, when Dobie, Burnett, and Webb, there have been conversations for a long time about what was going to happen. Closure was on the table at one point in time, and the community had a real visceral reaction to that. These are community schools. I'm thinking about Dobie in particular. These folks are from that community and they're bringing their kids to that campus, and they know the staff, they know the teachers, and maybe they went there. So there's a lot of emotion wrapped up into it. So no, it wouldn't necessarily have solved the problem, although it was on the table.
So we know Thursday afternoon the TEA sent a 4-page letter to Austin ISD Superintendent Matthias Segura, essentially laying out their reason for denying this proposed partnership that the district wanted with TCIS. They gave 3 requirements that had to be met in order for this partnership to be approved. So let's go through those. The first requirement was the third-party vendor had to have been in existence for at least 3 years. That one was met, right?
That was met. This program TCIS has been a nonprofit since 2019.
So 7 years there. Requirement 2, they had to have managed similar sort of turnaround plans at multiple campuses for multiple years. Also, this one met. Yes,
they've operated some schools in San Antonio, and they've also operated some schools within Longview ISD and Edgewood ISD. So they met that requirement. And I also want to point out that these requirements that we're going through, maybe not these in particular, there was a point in 2020 where TEA actually created stricter requirements for these operators that would come in under the 1882 benefits, because they wanted to make sure that if they approved these partnerships and if they approved these benefits, I mean, it's a big deal, an accountability pause. This is a big instrument that the state has to make sure campuses are performing well and are getting good student outcomes. And so they want to make sure that if we approve this, especially for schools like Dobie, Burnett, and Webb that it's gone a while not performing well according to the state's rules and requirements, that these are proven operators who can turn the school around.
And that leads nicely into the third requirement, because this was the sticking point here. I'm going to read it here. Requirement 3 has a track record of managing campuses to academic success or has significantly improved the academic performance of campuses. And the TEA said that TCIS did not meet that requirement.
That's correct. And they gave a pretty thorough assessment as to how they arrived there. So TEA officials said essentially when they got the application from the district, they reviewed these other schools and campuses that TCIS has operated in the 7 years that they've existed and been doing this work. And they said in some instances with some of these schools that the schools either didn't improve while TCIS was operating, or that after TCIS got in there, they actually performed lower. So that was the concern that TEA lined out. And they said, again, particularly for Dobie, Burnett, and Webb, campuses where they're already under turnaround plans, campuses where they really need to see improvement. It's gone several years, 5 years, with an unacceptable rating. We need to know that you can get the job done and you can turn it around. And so that's kind of what they're citing here as to why they denied that application.
So this letter came from the TEA Thursday afternoon. It went to, again, AISD Superintendent Segura. What was his response to this letter?
So we asked a couple questions about the content of this letter. And the school district did not address, I think, the larger, broader concern, right? Because there's a lot, right? There's the issue of just, we actually do want these campuses to improve and turn around, but there's a larger looming issue of, are we going to lose local control of our district? And so they didn't address that in their statement, but they did tell us this. They told us that while they're disappointed by the TEA's response, they look forward to sharing additional details that reinforce our certainty that TCIS has the experience and capacity to meaningfully improve student outcomes at these 3 schools. And they talked about how they were looking forward to bringing them in as a partner. And so I think what stood out to me about this is that it spoke to maybe a path forward for TCIS with an 1882 partnership. And so I reached back out to the Texas Education Agency to get a better understanding. Is this the end all be all, this letter, or are there opportunities to appeal? And like AISD is saying, give further information about why they think TCIS is the right one for the job and can improve these schools and does have the reputation and the data to show that they can improve the schools. And I heard back from TEA and they told me that under the 1882 rules at this point, it does not lay out an appeals process. So I think that is important to note. I'm curious, and I asked AISD, tell me what you mean, what would that do? Are you expecting there to be an appeal process? What's that going to look like? And I have not heard back just yet on that.
You also reached out to TCIS as well. What was their response to some of these claims against them in this letter?
TCIS told me this. They said, on behalf of their nonprofit, they're really continue to be honored to be a part of the Austin ISD community and to have the opportunity to help the students at these schools. And that was really the extent of their comment to us. And I think another important element of context here is that, and TEA pointed this out, just because the state is not approving the benefits, the 1882 benefits, for this partner working with AISD in these 3 schools, it doesn't mean that the district can't continue to work with them. And so both statements to me suggest that they still plan to move forward potentially with TCIS as the partner for these schools to help turn them around.
What's sort of the timeline here? When are we expecting this next round of accountability ratings to be released?
We'll know in August, or I should say, typically the TEA releases accountability scores in August. We've seen in previous years lawsuits be filed to prevent and block accountability scores from coming out. They've eventually come out, but in some cases months, years later.
Yeah.
So they are expected to come out in August. There's nothing preventing them from doing that right now. And it should be noted that while the letter grade may not improve, the score can, right? Like you may get an 85 one year and an 89 the next, and it's still a B, but you improved. And we've already seen these campuses do that. Some of them were on the edge of getting a letter grade above, and were right there. And so it'll be interesting to see how they are improving, if they get, if they don't improve. But ultimately, in regards to the larger question of will we see the state intervene similar to what we've seen in Houston ISD, it'll be dependent on if they get an F or if they get a D, or if they get a C. A D would essentially pause. It would not break the chain, so they would still count as like 4 Fs and 1 D, but essentially if they were to get a C, that's the outcome they're looking for. They're looking to get a C because that means clean slate. The next year we're not like, hoping and praying that we don't get an F. You can start over.
Yeah.
So if they were to get an F after that C,
it would be their first.
It would be their first in this chain of accountability.
Yeah. If one of these schools does get another F, there is, again, as we mentioned, the possibility of state takeover. Do you know, would that happen immediately? What sort of timeline would there be for this state-appointed board to be in place and a state-appointed superintendent?
That's more of what we're working to better understand. In some instances, we've seen school districts sue. So Houston ISD, for instance, there was a lawsuit involved that prevented the state takeover from happening for quite some time before it ultimately began, and we saw Mike Miles take over as superintendent. He was appointed a board of managers, and there's been a lot of reporting around that. So I would hesitate to say how and what how it would happen or what timing it would happen, because there could always be something that makes it happen slower. But those are some of the questions we're still working to answer. And
again, we don't know what's going to happen. We're waiting for these accountability ratings to be released, likely sometime in August, but we'll see. Lots to report on over the past couple of years, and we're going to continue to follow this. It's a big story that affects the entire district. Again, if one of these campuses get this 5th F rating in a row, it opens up the entire district to state takeover, not just these 3 campuses. So really, if you're a parent at one of these other schools, even if it's an A-rated school, this still could impact your child's education.
Absolutely. And you think about the language that folks at Austin ISD and the parents and families use. The local control matters a lot to any family at any school district, to any staff at school district, but there's a lot of pride that Austin ISD has in the local control and programs that they've created. And Superintendent Segura has talked about what we hold close as a community and being able to, the programs that define Austin ISD and the culture that defines Austin ISD. And so this would be a big blow if it were to happen, that the state would come in. But also, Austin ISD has been going through a lot of things that other districts are going through, by the way. A multi-million-dollar deficit that they are working their way out of currently. Consolidations that we were reporting on what feels like a second ago that are still happening. I mean, we're recording this on the last day of school, the last day of 10 campuses today. And so there's a lot going on. They're coming off the heels of big state intervention as it relates to their special education program. They've been able to wiggle out of a lot of things and adjust and improve, and they're still fighting to do that. And so I will be very curious to see what happens here. And I think everyone is really hoping that the kids can and the staff can pull out a better grade. I think TEA is hoping that they can pull out a better grade, because ultimately at the heart of it are kids and students and communities and people who want to see stability in their communities. TEA, obviously, their goal is to make sure student outcomes improve. And that's what they're laser focused on, as well as the district. So it'll be really interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, lots to report on, lots to wait and see what happens. Kelly, thank you for your reporting.
Thank you for having me here.
You can watch all new episodes of Inside the Investigation on the KXAN Plus app every Friday starting at 1 p.m. Just search for KXAN on your preferred streaming devices, such as Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and Samsung TV. You can also listen to KXAN's Investigative Podcast, where we feature audio versions of our weekly Inside the Investigation episodes. Find those every Saturday morning wherever you get your podcasts. Just search for KXAN Investigates.